Hello friends, hope this fits you very well. I have come to you again to share this webinar on risk and pollution prevention for investment projects. As we go on this module 11, we have module 11 ABC. We'll take on the IFC standard for this, and then gradually streamline down to some local laws and methods. Okay, so we'll just dive in straight into the webinar for today, and please keep in touch for us to clear the 4 sub-webinars for this batch. Okay, so we'll take them on to the sub-webinars, sub-modules in this series. So resource efficiency and pollution prevention for investment projects. First of all, you will say what is pollution, and then what is pollution prevention, and then what is, of course, resource efficiency, what it means, and how it can be applied to your project as we go on. Okay, so for the term pollution, it is used majorly to refer to hazardous and non-hazardous materials or chemicals, if you like, or pollutants that could be in the solid, liquid, or gaseous states that is harmful to humans or animals or plants. So this is just a modified definition I am giving based on the term pollution. And it includes other components such as pests, pathogens, thermal discharge of water, greenhouse gas emissions, odor, it could be dust, let's say suspended particulate matter in the air due to a particular project or activity. Okay, so it could also be electromagnetic radiation or any kind of radiation or vibration, and then whatever it is that alters the natural sequence or natural composition of the air, the soil, or let's say the land, or any water body, groundwater inclusive. This we put together and call it pollution in its different forms. Okay, then when we look at pollution prevention, it does not mean absolute elimination of all of these that are listed, but it also means avoidance. How do you avoid, or how do you minimize the pollution based on an activity? If it's not possible to avoid completely, as in most cases, but there are measures that can be put in place to ensure that this pollution impact is minimized, or the source is being looked into to reduce the impact as you go on a project. Okay, so that is the term pollution prevention. So actually this module 11 is the performance standard 3 of the IFC, and we're using the IFC documents as a guide to make sure that we are within context of what the IFC requirements are for projects. Generally, when you are looking to implement a project and at the planning stage and requiring funding from local banks or from international banks, you can use those guides that we are given as a starting point, because once these requirements are fulfilled, you'll be good to go for most of the local financing agencies. Okay, so the performance standard 3 is the resource efficiency and projects. So usually you check to see, during your planning period, you check what the requirements, assess the requirements on your project, and then you look at the action requirement, action required, what actions you need to take based on the requirements of the IFC as regards pollution prevention. So it could be that you need to redesign your projects, maybe the engineering design, to be able to capture maybe low nitrogen oxide burners or proper seals. Maybe you need to put proper seals on your pumps, depending on the project. Let's say it's a power plant you want to build. So you have to have some proper seals on all pumps in order to comply with this requirement, or you may need to have some submerged fuel on tanks and loading, or pavers for high traffic areas, or regular monitoring of your valves, the seals, and flanges for leaks. So all of these steps are taken into consideration when analyzing the specific requirements and whether your project is capturing these things or not, or whether you have policies, guidelines, or manuals, or particular assessments done, let's say environmental impact assessment done and captured on. So the IFC performance standards will benchmark your documents with the standard guidelines in the performance standards tree as regards to pollution. Okay, so let's dive straight into the business of the day. So I will take us bit by bit and very fast. I hope I meet up with the demand here. We go to slide 2. This webinar generally is going to cover the objectives and requirements for the performance standards 2. It's going to cover the resource efficiency component of it, as the subject implies. It's going to also cover the pollution prevention requirements, and we will see how to, as we go on, if we can and if time permits, to be able to relate it with some practical examples. We can't relate it to this model. We will look at how to relate it in other models as we go on. Okay, so actually this performance standards recognizes generally increased economic activity and urbanization, that this urbanization and development efforts often will generate increased levels of pollution to air, water, and land, and consume finite resources, in a manner that may threaten people and the environment, or most especially communities in the places where we operate, like we have taken on stakeholder engagement and taken on community engagement precisely. All of this have overarching impact on both the employees and, most importantly, the communities. There's also a growing concern, as you see on our bullet points here. There's a growing concern for, there's a global concern and a consensus on efforts to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from projects, which have obviously been threatening the public health and welfare of current and future generations based on the Sustainable Development Goals and relevant international pronouncement on greenhouse gas emissions. So standards also outlines a project-level approach to resource efficiency and pollution prevention and control in line with international disseminated technologies. In addition, the ability of the private sector companies to adopt technologies and practices as far as their use is feasible in the context of a project that relies on commercially available skills and resources are of great importance. Okay, so the proponent of a project, let's say the client, as IFC technology implies, or the project investor, okay, will implement technically and financially feasible and cost-effective measures for improving its consumption of energy, water, as well as resources and material inputs, with a focus on areas that are considered core business activities. So the principle of cleaner energy is mostly being focused on this performance standard PS3. cleaner energies into product design, production process with the objective of conserving raw materials, conserving energy, conserving water. As we go in this webinar, we are going to look into that in detail. Okay, so we go to the objectives. The objectives of this resource efficiency and pollution prevention standard is to avoid or reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, like I explained during the introduction, and also to avoid, or where avoidance is not possible, to minimize impact on human health and the environment, by minimizing the pollution sources or by redesigning the pollution sources to ensure that the pollution emissions are minimized, brought to the minimal possible levels based on technology modification where possible. So this is one of the objectives. Another objective is to promote more sustainable use of resources, including energy and water. Some projects have high water requirements. So if the objective for resource efficiency is to reduce, if possible, the water usage, what are the options available? We are going to be capturing in this webinar. What are the options available? And if this is a key objective, how can this be achieved? Okay, so there are requirements that when your project is about to get started, you have to check on the requirements and assess, like I said during the introduction, assess whether you are meeting this requirement, and if you're not, what are the gaps? We call that in most cases environmental and social due diligences, ESDD. What are the gaps that are observed based on your project design, based on your project planning, so that this performance standard can now be able to be a benchmark, So during the project life cycle, the proponent will consider ambient conditions and apply technically and financially feasible resource efficiency and pollution prevention principles and techniques that are best suited to avoid or minimize, where possible, adverse impact on human health and the environment. So there will be different options, but which is best suited for this project? Techniques applied during the project life cycle will be tailored to the hazard risks of the project and and must be consistent with international best practices. Okay, so as reflected in various internationally recognized sources, including the World Bank, the EHS, environmental health and safety guidelines, and all that. So the proponents will refer to the guidelines, the environmental health and safety guideline of the World Bank, or any other document that is internationally accepted when evaluating and selecting resource efficiency and pollution control techniques for the project. So the EH contain the performance levels and measures that are normally acceptable and applicable to each project, depending on project peculiarity. We had a module on environmental health and safety guideline, EHS, of World Bank. I would recommend that you check out that particular module so that you can understand what the guideline provides. But basically, it contains the performance levels and measures that are normally acceptable to the World Bank group and that are generally considered to be achievable in new facilities at reasonable costs, or even if it's new facilities, existing facilities, but at reasonable cost. Okay, so when the project host or proponent, is looking to follow these guidelines, sometimes you can use the local guidelines. Some countries have, I think Namibia have some local guidelines on environmental health and safety. It may differ from the World Bank guideline, but the levels and the measures presented can be managed, and then you can benchmark with a World Bank guideline if perhaps it is less stringent. If the local law is less stringent than the World Bank provisions. So if that is the case, if it is less stringent than others provided in World Bank, you can view specific project circumstances and check what the differences could be, and then see how to synchronize for to make sure that all that is required is captured. So this webinar is going to stop here because of time, and we'll take a short break and then come back. But please drop your comments and your questions. I can see some questions are rolling in, and your questions, and I will get down to those. I can see somebody talking about a particular project and how the EHS guideline was not able to address the issues raised. Okay, that's a good one. We will come back, and you need to tell us more about what issues specifically so that we can now discuss on them. I can see somebody's responding to you, but let's get on and see. So with short break, and then we'll be back to discuss the pollutions itself and the measures to be put in place, which is on our module here, the pollution prevention measures, waste, hazardous materials, and also the resource efficiencies. Mentioned a little about GHG and water consumption, but we'll go into details after this short break.